more pro in this.
Hey,
Daniel, how are you doing?
good. The
Uh,
connection was a little strange, huh?
can you?
How's that?
Yeah, no, it's I'm a beginner in this field.
Well, you're doing pretty good.
You see, can you see me okay?
Yeah, I can see you okay.
Because I don't see you yet. Can I see the comments of the people? One second. See their comments, but I don't see you. Can you guys see Daniel?
I see both of us.
Oh, okay. Okay,
So
good.
hopefully it's good.
So yeah, it's kind of new to me, but it's really exciting. I don't know if you have had the. Oh, let me ask you again. Now you're gone. Ask again. Daniel Arsham. Here we go. Ah, perfect. Let me switch off the comments. So
Okay.
how are you holding up?
You know, I'm here, I'm working, trying to stay active, trying to stay in touch with my team. So obviously everyone's working from home for the time being. But, you know, we have a lot of exhibitions that are planned out through, really 2022. So I'm taking this opportunity to kind of dive deep into some of those models. A lot of them are digital models that I can still work on. And then, as I've been here, I've just been trying to stay busy making drawings. So I've been working on a lot of drawings. Everything's a bit up in the air because we
Are
don't
you
know when.
also homeschooling?
Also homeschooling.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my wife and I are kind of splitting time. So, yeah, 7-year-old homeschool, trying to do some art workshops. Did a Play-Doh sculpting session yesterday with them.
Oh, fantastic. But you offline.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
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 Because I just got off the phone. We have an arts program called König Kids, and I
Okay.
was just on the phone with our sort of educational teacher and thinking of what we could do via Instagram. It was funny because she's like totally, her background is like so offline.
Yeah.
And then she said like normally she would not so be much, wouldn't be so into it, but under these circumstances, maybe it's a different
Yeah.
case. And and so you were pretty much affected, right? You had like a big project in Tokyo planned.
So obviously, I had a major project in Hong Kong for
Yeah.
Basel, which was postponed. And then I had a project in Beijing, project in Tokyo, which the project in Tokyo apparently is going to go on because the work had shipped before all of this was happening. So I won't be there, obviously, but the project will happen, and I'll be able to talk about it to people through Instagram. And, I have a big exhibition in the summer with UCCA that we've just decided to move to 2021.
Hmm.
Um,
Because
you
they're
know,
open again, right?
Seems like in China things are pretty much back to normal. I mean, there's heavy restrictions on travel and everything like that between the cities, but I think it's going to last much longer here. It feels like it's going to because people just don't, abide by the rules here.
Yeah, I
Or
mean
what the
that's also
government's asking.
I think why China is I mean that's a pro on living in a totalitarian regime that things have been done quick and work out and
Yep, and they're
I mean it's a
efficient.
bit cynical to say, but yeah, we opened a show. We kind of curated a show in collaboration with Tang Contemporary in Beijing, and they open again. It's very,
Yeah,
as you said, it's very restricted. There's only a certain amount of people allowed to come in,
yeah,
and but I find it really, I'm totally energized by it. I mean, of course, it's terrible, but at the same time, because of all the sick people and deaf people, but
mhm.
the whole like the change of I mean, imagine all the whole art fair calendar is like shook up,
Everything.
and
I
maybe
mean, when you
maybe
think about it, there aren't too many global events that the entire planet shares at once. There are things that happen locally. They can be positive things, they can be negative things, but I've been thinking a lot about reaction to global events in the past. And certainly World War I, World War II, all of these things had a huge impact on the arts, shifted people's completely their worldview. And I don't think the world will ever be exactly as it was a month ago, 2 months ago, last December. It's just not going to go back to the way it was. We're in a new paradigm, and I think travel is going to be different. The way that we communicate, obviously, things happening online is a big new world, and we're seeing the potential uses for that. And there will be some amazing art that comes out of this. People's careers will be started. People's careers will end. We don't know.
Yeah, and how is it for you who works like in a big infrastructure, who then suddenly is like limited to your own hands again? Huh?
There's a couple of interesting things. So I'll show you some drawings that I've been working on. But one of the things that I've been doing, with my team, ironically, for the last couple of years, I've been producing a lot of bronze work in China. And so my foundry in China, we had shipped things there, and they're working. So they're back. That stuff is in production. Mm-hmm. And as I said, a lot of my team in the production studio, I had considered that this was going to be a possibility quite early. So I closed my studio almost 2 weeks ago already. And I had everyone go home and figure out how to work from home.
Because you had somehow like your own experience, knowledge from your trips to Asia?
I mean, I definitely had friends in China that were telling me how real this was and how quickly it was spreading. But I also just had this feeling that this was going to happen, and, better to be prepared than, and to know how to work through that, than to be scrambling in the last minute. So I did that. And then, I'll show you a couple drawings that I've been.
Let me ask you quick. Do you have like a holding stick for your phone?
No, this is about as good as it gets.
But how do you hold it, by your hand? No.
Now, before I just rested it on my computer, against my computer.
But you have a stand.
Yeah.
Okay, I need to get one of those.
Get one of those.
I'm becoming a pro.
Yeah.
That's why I'm so shaky. It's like my hands. Oh wow.
Yeah,
I saw that in your Instagram stories. Are you do them completely free-handed?
Yeah,
no projection, no.
No, I use an image that I'm looking at during it. But I actually studied painting and drawing in school, not sculpture. So my background was really in this. These are a couple of other drawings that more recent things that I've been getting into. So it's a mix, right? This is Lucius Verus, an ancient Greek bust here. This is the trainer from Pokemon.
Yeah. So you mix like pop culture with ancient art history, and it's like all one culture appropriation.
Yeah, this is really what my work has always been about, is kind of mixing time. So things that we imagine from the past can be blended in with objects from the future, and really, in a way, the goal, right, can be to sort of dislocate people in time. So when they're looking at the works, they don't really have an understanding not only where they are in time, but also where these objects come from. They could be from the past, but they look like they're contemporary objects. So that doesn't make sense either. There's a bit of confusion in it.
Can we look again at the drawings?
Yeah.
Can you show us again?
Sure. So typically, these drawings are, I'm starting from an image of the original. This one happens to be in the Louvre, and I'm making these as preparatory drawings so that when we do the actual erosions, I do have some control over where they go in the actual sculptures, right?
But this is it's not a sketch for instructing how to do a sculpture, right?
Yeah, no, it is.
It is. Okay, it is. It is also a working instrument.
Exactly. So I started these, until this last show in Paris, I never showed these drawings. It was kind of something that came up in the end with Emmanuel when he saw them, and he said, maybe it's interesting to show the preparatory works about how you actually arrive to the final objects. And then, when you see them next to these drawings, you kind of understand a little bit more about the thinking around them.
Can I see into one of the bubbles? I remember they're like these almost like thinking bubbles of
Oh yeah,
the
I mean
text to it.
it's gonna be backwards, right? But
Yeah.
this one says crystal eroded Charmander, drawn and imagined in 3020. So
Ah, okay, okay.
Charmander is the character, and then some of the other ones. Actually, this one, the Greek one, it says ancient Greek bust reimagined during the time of quarantine in 3020. So some of them are also a
A
little
thousand
bit
years
like,
from now, we have another
yeah,
quarantine happening.
locked into this moment in time. I mean, this is a global historical event that
Yeah.
we will certainly remember for our entire life. And I think to mark these things in a moment in time is, super interesting.
You know, the other day, my daughter, she's 5. She said like, "Oh, the tiger is sick." You know, her stuffed tiger. And
Yeah.
then she said, "Oh, what's wrong?" And she said, "Oh, he didn't wash his hands. He got corona."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's so funny how she's off kindergarten, of course, as everybody, but for her it's totally normal. For her it's
Yeah.
not because this is a reality she knows. So there's no it's only for us kind of strange. So for the next generation, it will be
Yeah.
like, I don't know, as you say, in Germany, maybe for us, GDR is a given fact, hardly to imagine, and this will be one probably.
Yeah, for sure.
And tell me again about the process. So because the sky, I saw your show in Paris, which I really liked with the sculptures. But these
So
are
I don't have much actual work here, but I'll show you one piece which I haven't really shown. These works were not made to show or to sell. They were made just for me. So I'm a huge Star Wars fan.
yeah.
So this is an eroded R2-D2, and you can see inside there's crystal kind of embedded within it, right? These areas of erosion. So this one was cast off of a toy, which was this scale. And in the areas of erosion, I'm putting a wax material so that when I do the cast, they're kind of just disintegrating and falling apart, right? You can kind of see there.
But what I was referring to is like you are doing, these are actual molds, no? You
Oh,
have the
yeah.
original and then you make a mold and then you make a cast of it, right?
Correct. So they had to be taken apart, right? Because there's multiple different sections. So, some objects are more simple than others. In the case of the works from the Louvre, the Lucius Verus, the Venus de Milo, and those works, I actually was granted access to pre-existing molds that were owned by the French government. So starting in the 19th century, as a way to kind of export French culture, they began to make molds of the most famous works from the Louvre and send them to like the colonies. When I visited you in Berlin, we went to the museum, and there's similar casting facilities that were originally used as this kind of colonial export of culture, but in more recent times have been used as a way to really for study, right? So some of these things get shipped to art schools in different places around the world and to other museums. So it's effectively a one-to-one replica. So I was granted access to those molds, and which wasn't easy.
And the molds touch the original, right?
So today, they would never allow these molds to be made. But in the past, they were a little bit more cavalier with what they were doing with this kind of historical sculpture. So
yeah,
I had access to molds of, Michelangelo's Moses, which is in Rome, the Venus of Arles, these pieces which are
fantastic,
obviously like global historical works. And they range in period from 7th century BC all the way up through French neoclassical era.
Great.
Yeah.
And I wonder, the figure behind you, what is this? There's like a small figure behind you. Is this from you?
Yeah,
or is it
actually, this is, it's C-3PO. So I also made this one for myself.
Oh,
Behind
wow.
him is the Pikachu. And then, actually, I can't remember whether I showed you this. I collect also different sculpture, primarily bronze. This is a 19th century Daumier sculpture. This is actually this little one here. I don't know if you can see it. Let me see.
But you just juxtapose it. They're just standing together, the other one, the Pikachu and the figure and the bronze.
Exactly. Just on,
or you make a work out of it.
Well, actually, I'm thinking now this dômier, these small scale bronze sculptures. This thing is amazing. This is a De Chirico.
Wow.
So I've scanned these, and I'm going to be making larger versions of them, eroded. And the idea, in the studio, I purchased some 19th century marble works. One that I got an amazing offer on, which is a 1820 Canova, Venus Italica. And I'm going to be molding those, creating works out of them. And the idea is to be able to show them with the originals. So obviously I was granted access to these works from the Louvre, but I don't have access to the original. So I'm thinking of this show where you actually enter into a space that has all of these original works, and then you find after this kind of, it's almost like you're pushed into the future, right? And you're viewing these things with this
like with the past, like objects from the future combined with objects from the like sculptures from the past.
Yeah, exactly.
And like how you call it, you know, one of these cabinets.
A cabinet of curiosities.
Yeah, exactly, curiosity cabinet. And tell me, but you always appropriate, or do you sometimes also kind of remix digitally that you take? I don't know.
It's usually pre-existing things. So, you know, this project for me started about a little over 10 years ago. This idea about fictional archaeology. I was in Easter Island, and I you know, which is famous for the giant Moai statue. And it's a place where, I talked a little bit about this yesterday on my live, where archaeologists sort of disagree on the origin of the sculptures, what happened there. And I found this idea that you can have a disagreement within archaeology. You know, we often find history in that way to be somewhat like definitive when we read books about it. So if it can be undefined like that, perhaps I could reverse engineer it. And so when I returned from that trip, I started making these kind of future relic versions of contemporary objects. And it was important that the objects were linked to a particular moment in time. So the first thing that I started with was a camera. Time, your general...
Gone for a second. So was a camera, you said?
It was a camera, yeah.
Yeah.
And
and
then
an iMac too, right? Didn't you do an iMac?
I did do an iMac. I did these kind of groupings of works. So things around music, things around technology, things around sports, all of these different sort of subtopics that I could create an exhibition around. Yeah.
And tell me, you did this project with Dior, and there you picked up on a Guyano,
the newsprint,
right? The newsprint piece. And how did it come to that? Like, why did you pick up this?
So, you know, Kim Jones, when he took over at Dior, part of his project was to go back and reimagine what Dior's early interests were. And I didn't know, but he actually was a gallerist.
I know, yeah, Attila, yeah.
Yeah, and his gallery was not successful, so he went into fashion. And Kim asked me to come in, work with him, and one of the things we did was really spend a lot of time in the archives. They have this incredible archive in Paris of not only objects and pieces of paper and invites to shows from the 1950s, but all the way through the Galliano kind of era. And Kim was particularly interested in this newsprint, which was from Spring/Summer 2000. So I took that, I removed all the text and the images, kept the idea of the newsprint, and basically added drawings into this newsprint, and then we reinterpreted it. So
you work like this as you work with your sculptures also, with your work also, right? Picking up and pushing it further. Yeah. So
yeah.
Cool. So let me see. Maybe shall we take some questions?
Sure.
Yeah.
I guess you have to open the comments, yeah?
Yeah, this I did a couple of times already. So,
how long does it take to complete a drawing? Depends on how much homeschooling I have to do in a particular day, but usually I can get one of these drawings done in a day. Let's say 8 hours.
Okay. Oh, I have a question actually in between. you think that this time is positive for the creative for
I mean,
creating?
look, I've always had these periods of active creativity and then active thinking, and that was often defined by my travel. Obviously, when I'm traveling, I can't really be making work, and I find that this is the time for me to absorb, to go to museums. You know, when I was with you in Berlin, I went to go see a bunch of different things. Same in Paris. Now that I'm not traveling, I have to kind of divide that time in a different way, but it's certainly creating an opportunity to be introspective, to go back. I'm reading books that I read, 20 years ago. And I think there's definitely an opportunity there for that,
What's your estimation how long this is going?
I'm prepared for it to be through the fall. So I don't think maybe they're going to lift the quarantine. Obviously in New York, it's basically the worst place in the world probably right now.
Yeah.
Infections are doubling every 3 days. So I'm not planning on being back in the city for at least 2 months. And, I'm working with my team to find, obviously, things for them to do. So yeah. We'll see.
How do you think it's going to affect your studio practice in the long run?
I mean, I think a lot of it is we're finding new ways to communicate, not only between each other, but to communicate ideas. And a lot of my work, fortunately, over the last number of years, I rely on different fabricators, especially when I'm doing things in large scale. So all of the bronze works are made in foundries that are not within my studio, and I'm having to rely on some of that a little bit more. But I also think this moment, it allows me to really, I have a big exhibition planned for London in the fall. And honestly, I'm rethinking some of the concept around that exhibition, given the circumstances here. So I can react, in real time to the kind of global mood and, things that may have meant something before maybe mean less now, or vice versa.
So someone is asking why I put the comments off. It's because otherwise the comments are always in the if it's a split screen, there's always a comment
over somebody's face. Yeah.
Over the face, yeah.
Okay.
Then there's, can you talk about process versus product?
I mean, I don't know if this is a question about, what I enjoy most. No? Yeah. I mean, I think for me, there are artists who could make things in a studio, and their main objective is really for themselves. So they can make things, they make paintings, and they don't really care about whether these works are shown. For me, it's really about the engagement with the audience and about people kind of responding to the works in some ways sort of complete the works for me,
And then why you moved from drawing to sculpture?
So, I studied painting and drawing primarily in school, and when I finished school, I didn't have any money. A lot of the sculpture ideas that I wanted to realize, I couldn't physically do them either because I didn't have the space to do it, the technical means, or literally like the financial resources to put those things together. So drawing and painting early on was always a way for me to execute ideas that I couldn't in real life or real scale. And once I built up the studio, it didn't happen overnight. I've been doing this for my first show with Emmanuel was in 2003. So 17 years.
By the way, for the audience, there's a great podcast in Emmanuel's a conversation you had with this person from the RMD, where you explain where you went to school and how things shifted. I can really recommend it.
Yeah, I mean, if you go to my bio, there's a link on that shows a talk that I did at Cooper Union, which is really kind of my work from school all the way through now.
There's a question I can't fully read. When Leonardo da Vinci didn't have museums when he was alive, so can you finish it?
So why would people be, I don't know what the rest of the question is.
Oh, okay.
I mean, maybe the question is about, Da Vinci, I think is an example of an artist who, his work was more about executing ideas and thinking about things within his own world. And he was, not only an artist, but he was an inventor and a scientist, and you know, a poet and all of these other creative endeavors. And maybe parts of those creative outputs were for other people and parts of them were for himself.
I think that's a question for me. My eyes are more or less okay. I had an accident when I was a child. I was playing with firecracker and lost my eyesight, and now I have one eye which is on 25%. So that's why I've always have to be so close to the camera,
I mean,
to the screen to see the questions. That's why
yeah.
that's why you see my forehead a lot.
Yeah, I can't wait till your book comes out, because you know it's so interesting for everyone who's watching. You know, Johan, you're basically 75% blind, right? So as an art dealer, it's a bit of a strange position to be in, because a lot of the work, first of all, you definitely experience it, visual work, different. But one of the interesting things that I read that you said was that you don't pick artworks, you pick artists. And you really spend a lot of time thinking about what their work is about, how they speak about it, to understand the full kind of ethos and concept of the work.
Yeah, but I think really, you know, since Marcel Duchamp's Urinal, the definition of art and the visual art per se has changed. And it's very interesting because after my accident, I went to a blind school in blind boarding school for partially sighted and blind kids. And we had we had an art teacher who was very ambitious. And he said that usual, normal seeing people stand in front of contemporary art as blind people, you know, because they look at it and they don't understand it. And so he was very, I mean, it was a bit didactic, but this didactic approach to art, because I grew up in an art household. Yes. This didactic approach for me was amazing because for example, Manzoni's Pedestal of the Earth, you know, it's like a reverse. Like we can talk about this, and images start in the head. And you see this. It's a pedestal. It's a pedestal, big concrete pedestal, which is standing in the nowhere land somewhere in Denmark, and upside down on this concrete plinth, it says "Pedestal of the Earth." So you have to think. You turn it around, and then the whole globe is a sculpture
on the pedestal.
On the pedestal, and it's, I mean, it was interesting when I for the first time saw Marcel Duchamp's Urinal. I was pretty much disappointed. You know, because it's such a trivial object, and there's even this smeared signature on it. Okay, so let's see. One last question for you. I liked one. We have to see related to. Okay, maybe why don't we take this one for you?
What are you currently reading? So
the news, I guess.
Things, but
every morning.
I've been rereading a lot of Joseph Campbell. You know, he wrote a lot about mythology, and I also talked about this a little bit yesterday. But part of my re-interest in him is I've been doing a lot of research into George Lucas and Star Wars. Let me show you something really crazy that I recently picked up. This is one of the original drawings, Tom Jung drawings, for the poster for Empire Strikes Back. So in reading about George Lucas and his concept originally for Star Wars, he read a lot of Joseph Campbell, specifically because he was interested in creating myths that would translate culture and time. And a lot of the kind of characters in Star Wars are based on these sort of universal ideas, these universal tropes. So Joseph Campbell, I've been reading this some Stephen King, getting into the dark quarantine moments. Yeah, and then some art books. You know, I've been reading a lot about Charlotte Perriand, her time in Tokyo, how that influenced her furniture designs, and staying busy.
I have a great recommendation. It's considered somewhat of a feminist book. It's called The Wall. It's an Austrian, I forgot her name now, but it's an Austrian writer. Okay. And it's a story of a woman who's like on the countryside, and then suddenly there's a big, giant wall, locking her off from the world. It's an amazing book. I think it's called The Wall, Die Wand in German.
The Wall. Okay.
The Wall. It's kind of frightening. I don't really understand. Probably it's considered like important feminist because she's like a woman and on her own. But it's really it's an amazing book because then she's like in full isolation. I don't want to spoil it.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for doing this. And tomorrow. I don't know. I have to post it. Okay, thanks. And we stay in touch.
Yes, great to speak with you. Bye-bye,
Thanks
everyone.
for joining. Bye.
Yes.